Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Standards for Libraries in Higher Education Revision Update. My name is Andrea Falcone and I have the pleasure of serving as chair of this task force. Also joining us is our co-chair,
Felice Maciejewski. Welcome, everyone.
So Felice will be doing a little behind-the-scenes work for us today, but I'm hoping she'll be able to chime in and help us with some of the questions that appear in the chat box. So we want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to attend this open forum. Just a bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded, so you'll be able to access today's recording and the corresponding slides at a later date. So probably early next week, we'll send out a communication. So in our short time together, we'll summarize the charge for the task force, let you know what we've been doing since July, give some insight into the revision of the document itself, and ask for your feedback. Let's dive in. First, we want to get a sense of your familiarity with the standards, or SLHE, so sometimes we'll refer to it as SLHE. So Felice is going to pull up a poll for all of us to participate. This is one of many opportunities for your feedback. So go ahead and use the on-screen polling options to address this prompt. My experience with the SLHE is,
all right, I opened the poll. You should be seeing that.
Okay, great. So go ahead and answer this here. You know, your experience is high, medium, low, or have no experience to date. So also make sure to click the submit button. This might appear pretty far down at the bottom of your screen.
All right, so I've gone ahead and closed the poll. And I'm posting the results. Can you all see that?
Great. Yes, we can, Felice. This looks terrific. Okay, so thanks for your participation. It looks like about 24% have had high experience, about 29% medium experience, so we're kind of, more of us are in the medium level here. Some of us have no experience, haven't answered, so hopefully we'll catch you around at the next round of polling. So this is great. We've got a good mix of experience levels here, and we'll be using that as we move forward. Thanks, Felice.
You're welcome.
So regardless of your experience with the standards, we thought some background about our committee might be helpful. The current standards were approved in 2011 and are being reviewed as part of the typical 5-year review cycle. That is to say, nothing unusual has sparked this review. So our charge is as one might expect and includes reviewing the SLHE, reviewing outcomes as articulated in Regional Accrediting Association guidelines, incorporating accreditation standards, reviewing the performance indicators and expanding on them, recommending needed changes, producing a draft, seeking comments from stakeholders such as yourself, and then producing a final draft. We are fortunate to have a great team working on this revision. This team includes 15 members with representation from all types of academic libraries and an accrediting agency representative. A few of our members are with us today, and I'd like to acknowledge the time, dedication, and intellectual energy that they've put forth thus far. You may see them contribute to the chat happening on the sidebar as we go along. So here's our next opportunity to gather feedback. So you now know a little bit about us, and we'd like to learn a little bit more about you. So here's our next prompt. What type of institution are you affiliated with?
All right, everyone, I'm about to open the poll. There we go.
Okay, thanks, Felice. So what type of institution are you affiliated with? And you'll see a variety of options here. And we also have a choice for others. So you can always type in the chat box as well if you'd like to expand upon this.
All right, are you able to see the results?
So here we can see the choices. Might just take a moment for people to select one. And remember to click submit at the bottom of the page. Actually, Felice, it says that the poll has ended.
Okay, oh boy.
So at this time, if it's okay, if you just go ahead and type in the chat box,
Yeah.
whether you're with a 2-year degree granting institution, 4-year degree granting, 4-year degree granting with graduate programs, a special library, or something else. Thanks for including those responses. We'll just let a few of them trickle in. Okay, great. We're seeing a lot of 4-year degree granting with graduate programs. Yeah, so perhaps that's the majority of us here today.
So are you all able to see the results?
Actually, I do see them now.
Okay.
So great. Okay, so interesting enough, so as we're gathering feedback, we want to know if we've got wide representation at this forum today. That way, if we need to reach out to others specifically for feedback, because we want to make sure that these changes are relevant and appropriate for all types of academic libraries. So this is very useful for us to know. Thanks very much. Okay, so we'll be attempting another poll here on our next slide. So we're asking folks to reveal a little bit about what you use the standards for. So we know you said we have some experience using the standards, maybe about at the medium level. So here we're interested in knowing what do you use them for. So Felice, if you can, go ahead and open up that next poll for people. All right, excellent. So what do you use the standards for? We only have a few choices here simply because we could have the longest poll ever here. So we put in an option for other. And if you select other, please go ahead and add some additional details within the chat window so that we can get a better sense of what you're using the standards for. Okay, great. So someone mentioned in the chat self-study. Yes, thank you for that.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and apply the results.
Okay, terrific. So, yeah, that's great. So a few folks for accreditation reports, some for strategic planning library-wide. That seems to be a fair chunk of the responses, some for departmental strategic planning, and then a lot of folks said, yes, all of the above. We're using the standards for all of the above, so that's really great and very interesting to know. So terrific. Okay, thanks for those responses. With all this in mind, we'd like to tell you what we've done so far. We reviewed literature on future trends in libraries and higher education. We compiled a selected annotated bibliography summarizing relevant research on changes in higher ed that could, in a sense, impact the standards. That annotated bibliography included 6 different categories, beginning with resources about higher education and academic library trends, and then it moves into topical areas like accreditation and assessment. While this bibliography is by no means exhaustive, it aims to give the task force direction by exposing connections between the standards and recent trends. We also talked to some key stakeholders, including the original Standards for Libraries in Higher Education Task Force, the presentation team for planning, assessing, and communicating library impact, regional accreditation agencies, and the ACRL adjunct consultants. By gathering a variety of perspectives, these groups gave insight to the practicality of the current standards. We asked some questions about what's working well, what's not working well, and why not. All of these efforts led us to tease out a few overarching themes. These are the themes listed on the right-hand side of the slide. So they include areas like open educational resources, scholarly communications, accreditation, student success and retention, and the role of student employees. Through this work, we're recommending what I would categorize as minor revisions to the standards. That includes 9 revised principles or performance indicators. For the most part, we made revisions for further clarity and to be more inclusive. We also added 2 new performance indicators, and these changes can be easily viewed on the draft documents posted on ALA Connect, and so I've included that information here. So we don't have enough time to go through each change together, but I'll highlight a few. There are 9 principles, and remember that these are the broad areas like institutional effectiveness, educational role, space. And we're only suggesting changes within 5 of those 9 areas. So to give you a better sense, I'll highlight a change from each of those 5 areas in the upcoming slides. The first example is within Principle 3, Educational Role. And here is the original language, and I'll give you a moment to read this. In the revision, we emphasize that collections and services can and should be incorporated within curricular and co-curricular experiences for students. So this helps draw attention to educational experiences that happen outside of the traditional learning environment. Again, this is an example of broadening the performance indicator. Here's an example within the principal space. The library uses physical and virtual spaces as intellectual commons, providing access to programs, exhibits, lectures, and more. In the revision, we propose broadening the language to allow libraries more flexibility. And here is that revised language. The library uses physical and virtual spaces as intellectual commons according to the library mission. So again, just an example of giving libraries more flexibility. So we're not pinpointing them to focus on programs, exhibits, lectures, and more, but we're just being broad and saying, refer to your library mission. This next example repeatedly came up in our stakeholder conversations with regards to the principle, management and administration. Many colleagues felt like this principle only related to those serving in administrative roles. This original statement focuses on management and administration and planning and assessment. So we decided to broaden the language for inclusivity. The revision is a bit broader to include, quote, leadership. We also broadened the focus for resource allocation to all types of decision making. Hopefully you can see yourself in this principle regardless of the official title you hold within your library. Here's an example about the principal personnel. There was some confusion about using the language IT infrastructure, which you can see present here. Some libraries have their own IT departments, and some rely on campus IT, for example. The revised version focuses on library technology a bit more broadly. The revision reads, personnel keep current with library technology, applications, and infrastructure, and participate in ongoing training.
And Andrea, if I may add, I think it's important to note that the discussions that we had concerning this, we wanted to be sure that the smaller libraries were well represented in this standard, simply because some of the smaller libraries may not have their own IT staff and truly do have to rely on their institutional IT.
Yes, thanks, Elise, for that added comment. Yeah, I think the strength of the task force in having broad representation across all library types, some of these issues really came to light where folks didn't feel like their library was really represented in a particular performance indicator, and this is a prime example of that. Okay, so I did mention a little earlier that we added 2 new performance indicators, and interestingly enough, they are both under the principle of personnel. The first is focused on student employees, and this is actually the first time that student employees are explicitly mentioned. So it reads this way, 8.7. Library personnel engage with library student employees to provide mentoring and work that enhances their overall academic experience. So I'm wondering if at this time, again, this is a new performance indicator, if you would feel comfortable just sort of providing a little bit of feedback or your initial reactions to this within the chat box. Okay, so our folks find that student employees are a large part of your workforce or an important part of your workforce, whether large or small. How do you work with them? Is it something that you think libraries should be measuring? What kinds of experiences we provide to our student employees? Good, I'm seeing some positive responses within the chat box. Again, I'm seeing a little more positive affirmation here. This is great addition. Yes, thank you for that, Bruce. All right, great. There's another comment here saying the biggest intentional change we've made in our library is seeking out ways to recognize student work, giving opportunities for students to allow them to expand their resumes. Yes, that's terrific. So I do appreciate hearing a little bit of feedback. Please do continue to add information to the chat box. We will be collecting the transcript at the end of the session so we all can refer back to this a little bit later on. So this is very helpful. Again, this is the only explicit mention to student employees within the standards at this time, and it is a new performance indicator that we're proposing move forward. Great. So we have another additional performance indicator that we are suggesting be added to the personnel principle, and that would become 8.8, and that reads, library personnel continuously examine and transform roles to meet the needs of the evolving organization. This puts an emphasis on the constant evolution of our professional roles, and there have been quite a lot of documentation in the professional literature about evolving roles and transformative organizations. And so this is something that we wanted to propose to our attendees today to get a little bit of feedback. So does this performance indicator seem like something that you would embrace within your organization and your library? Again, think about your context a little bit. So we'd appreciate seeing a little bit of feedback within the chat box. I'll give you a moment to think about that. Perhaps talk with your colleagues if you are sitting around a table right now with them. So just glancing here at some of the comments, I love, Jennifer, thank you for the very enthusiastic response of continuously with the exclamation point. I love that. Yeah, so we see some other comments that say absolutely, roles change over time as libraries change. There can be some challenges with this, of course, yes, especially within a collective bargaining environment. Yes, thank you, Beth, for that comment. Yeah, smaller libraries as well could struggle with this a little bit too, but it looks like it seems important for libraries to be doing. Yeah, so I see a question here from Vicki. Thanks, Vicki. That you feel positively about this, but the question is, does this imply that personnel at all levels, I think, examine their own roles? And, you know, the beauty of the standards is that you can apply it however it works best in your context. So, you know, if you wanted to encourage individuals to each examine their role regardless of their level, I think that is doable, and that you could do some sort of assessment on that. Or it could be a more department level driven, depending on your structure, right? Department level or managerial level, you could say this is something that we're aspiring to do, which is continuously examine and transform our roles. So again, it's really about context. So the standards are not going to dictate to you that a particular library position would be in charge of doing this work at your library. So again, implement it however it best reflects the context that you're in, or you may choose not to. So I hope that kind of helps answer that question a little bit. And I see Rhonda posted there's a new goal area committee in ACRL, new roles and changing landscape. this performance indicator will help support the work that they're doing. So that's very interesting. I admit that I don't know much about that, so I would look forward to investigating that a little bit more and seeing how this PI works well with them. Yes, so good. So I am seeing quite a few comments about the smaller institutions may have some difficulty with this one. And remember that these performance indicators are aspirational, so it doesn't mean that you have to achieve these things fully. And also you determine what success looks like. So, you know, hopefully if you feel positively about it, you can find a way to implement this in some form within your library, again, at the aspirational level.
And Andrea, I'd like to add that that is, I think, a very important point to stress, especially for the smaller libraries.
Yes, that the aspirational piece. Yeah. And again, yeah, consider your context and think about, you know, how can we use this to work through continuous improvement and, you know, great strides to becoming even better at what we're currently doing well. So, great. So I see a few more comments there. I appreciate those. Again, the task force will take a very close look at those when we receive the transcript after this session. So just wanted to make sure we had a little bit of dialogue there about these new performance indicators, because these are the only two new PIs that we are recommending at this time. So we'll go ahead and move forward here to Principle 9, External Relations. This is actually our last example, and the original statement reads, library personnel convey a consistent message about the library and engage in their role as ambassadors in order to expand user awareness of resources, services, and expertise. Here we made a simplification. So this change will help libraries focus on the messaging to external stakeholders rather than focusing on the role of ambassadors. So really, we've just taken out that clause there. So it reads, library personnel convey a consistent message about the library to expand user awareness of resources, services, and expertise. We found through some of our conversations that the standards workshop presenters were spending some energy in trying to refocus the work that folks were doing in those workshops, because they were really targeting this idea of the library as ambassador rather than, you know, measuring whether or not a consistent message was being shared and about these particular things, right, resources, services, and expertise. So this is, again, an example of just clarification to help folks use the standards a little more efficiently and with some clarity. So this concludes the changes section related to principles and performance indicators. So I do want to pause here, though, and ask if there are broad questions about these particular changes or anything you really saw in the draft document, but specifically about the principles and performance indicators. We'll be talking about the appendices in just a few moments. So any questions, please go ahead and include them here in the chat box. And I suppose, Felice, if you noticed any questions in particular as we were going along that would be appropriate to address here, we could talk about those.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any burning questions here, which is okay. This is a kind of difficult thing to really draw on when we've got draft documents that are a little more in-depth than what's been presented on our slide. So that is absolutely okay, and we'll continue moving forward. If things come up, please do feel free to add them into the chat box. So there are two important tools within the SLHE, and the first is Appendix 1, which lists sample outcomes for select performance indicators. The task force is looking for some guidance on our revision of this section. In general, we aim to include at least one sample outcome for each principal. So currently there are quite a number of sample outcomes for educational role, for example, right? But less so for some other principles. So we were wondering if that was helpful for people if we include one sample outcome at least for each principal. We aim to include sample outcomes for any of the new performance indicators, and we've just discussed that there are two within the principle of personnel, the one that focused on student employees and the other on evolving roles. We also aim to simplify any of the original outcomes that are currently listed within the SLHE, and we really want to focus on including one verb within each of those outcomes. Some of them have multiple verbs, and this makes it actually kind of difficult for the assessment process. So we would like to just simplify that for folks. And we want to point users to additional resources for outcome development. We've heard from some of our stakeholders that outcome development is, if you're a little less experienced with this, that it can be very challenging. And so we want to help ease that process. So we intend to point to some additional resources if you'd like to further your expertise in that area as you're working with the SLHE. To guide the task force's efforts, we would like to know from you, how important are the sample outcomes? So how important is Appendix 1 to the work you've been doing with the SLHE? Do you really refer to those on a regular basis, or maybe you haven't looked at them at all? So we want to know, should we be spending a lot of energy on really enhancing the Appendix 1 sample outcome. So this is our next poll. So we're asking for your feedback here.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and open the poll.
Great. So again, how important are the sample outcomes?
All right, here we go.
Okay, great. Thank you, Felice. So good. It looks like about 30%. 30% of us have used the sample outcomes in their work. Okay.
And you'll see that someone, Zoe, just posted the sample outcome link in the chat box.
That's great. Thank you, Zoe. Great, terrific. Yeah, so all that documentation is available online. So good. So we've got some familiarity with using the sample outcomes. About 11% of us said that, I was not aware of those sample outcomes. So at least I guess we're moving in the right direction by bringing it up to date. And then some some folks indicated about 15% that they were aware of them but haven't used them. So yeah, in particular, this would be really helpful for us if you would take a look at the redrafted outcomes. So let's move to the next poll because I think this would be, this has got some connection here.
All right.
And so we're asking you, and Felicia, you can go ahead and open that poll. We're asking you if it would be helpful to have sample outcomes for all 9 principles. So of course, it's unlikely if you have not been using them, that maybe you're unsure at this point if they would be helpful, but perhaps you're not using them because you don't find them helpful. So you may answer no in that case. So great, Felicia's shown us the responses here. It looks like majority of folks would really be interested in seeing sample outcomes for all of those principles. So overall, when looking at this appendix, please consider which sample outcomes, and that's really broadly speaking, which sample outcomes need to be further revised. Okay, so if they're, as you're providing feedback for us and through an online, we've got an online feedback form, and we'll provide the link to that near the end of the presentation. But as you're considering the draft, think about what really would be most helpful for you. So questions like which performance indicators should be represented, within the SPACE principle? Which one of those could you really use a sample outcome for? Or are the current areas sufficient? It'd be great for us to know that as well. And then, do other ACRL guidelines and standards need to be mentioned within the sample outcomes? So, for example, we were thinking, should the ACRL framework be mentioned in the sample outcomes for Principle 3, which is educational role? So, in some ways, that can be difficult as some of these standards documents change. So if we tie ourselves to particular current standards or documentation in other ACRL guidelines, that it may be a challenge for us, and perhaps in updating the standards at a later date, that we would really have to pay attention to the inclusion of other ACRL standards and guidelines. However, if it is genuinely helpful, we are willing to explore that possibility. So again, just an example for you to think about as you're providing feedback on those sample outcomes. Okay, moving forward. Similarly, we are seeking your impressions about Appendix 2, which is the benchmarking and peer comparison section. So the original standards included a list of sample benchmarks by type. So some examples are expenditures per student, total collection expenditures per student, total operating expenditures per student, etc. In the current draft, you'll see a kind of work in progress. So we've got some sample benchmarks there that are organized around the principles in the standards rather than by topic or type. So with Appendix 2, we aim to provide an overview of the use and value of institutional peer comparisons. We also aim to share benchmarks that align with the principles and performance indicators in the sample outcomes in Appendix 1, so more closely tying Appendix 1 and 2 together. We also aim to point users to additional resources for benchmark development and peer comparison strategies. So again, if you would like to do further work in this area, that you would be able to have some resources at your fingertips to do so. So again, we'd like to hear from you. How important are the benchmarking examples? So in a moment, Felice will open up that poll, and you can let us know how important these are to you.
All right, here we go. And here are the results.
Okay, thanks, Felice. Yeah. So yeah, it looks like majority of attendees are saying here that they've used benchmarking examples in their work. It's sort of at the medium level here, right? 33%. Some folks, again, low, not really using them, and some were unaware. So again, if the reason is because they don't seem to be applicable to your library, to your work, we would like to hear that. Also, those of you who are really using it sort of at that medium level, you've used the examples. Are there others that you would like us to include that would, again, help you in doing your work? And this is really for some of that reporting that you all mentioned earlier, you know, when you were writing your self-study or your accreditation reports, even your annual reports, that maybe you are using this information and these sort of sample benchmarking as your guidelines for preparing those reports. So at this time, if anybody has any ideas about benchmarks that you currently use, please go ahead and type those into the chat box. I think we'd be really interested to hear about them specifically. You know, are there benchmarks that are kind of your favorites, you use them regularly and they positively impact your work? Go ahead and include them there in the chat box. And it's okay if it's a repetition of what's already included in Appendix 2. Okay, great. So we're seeing some things come in here about we use the reference research consultations, benchmark. Yeah, the benchmark for information literacy sessions. I don't believe there is one for courses necessarily, but information literacy sessions is presented as group presentations. So I think Zoe is asking a question about there as well. And I think some of this language also is in direct connection to the iPEDS language, but we can look more closely into that. Oh, okay, so Beth is saying, I think, or Laura, sorry, we're moving along here, but is saying something about using the personnel benchmarks to request additional positions or lines. Yeah, I think actually that is one of the more widespread uses of it.
And Laura has mentioned the information on degrees held by librarians and professional staff as a benchmark for personnel. I think that also ties in with a lot of the accrediting agencies.
Yes, it does. Yeah, very interesting. Good. Yeah, great. And thank you. I think it looks like Kara's included a link to the Counting Opinions website through ACRL, which has some definitions about group information sessions. So yes, some of this background is available. Oh, so an interesting one from Vicki. Thanks, Vicki. Need benchmarks for keeping up to date, contributing to the profession, etc. That's I don't think that's one that we've discussed actually. So that's very interesting. Thank you. Great, this is excellent. Yes, thank you all for contributing to that discussion. Again, we will take a closer look at some of that after the session. I think, though, that this peer comparisons and benchmarking section is perhaps one of the most difficult areas of SLHE to really make applicable to your current library organization. But that's why we aim to make this a little bit more helpful and readily applicable to the work that you're doing. So thank you for that. So we're asking you to review the benchmarks that are incorporated into our draft document. And the committee welcomes, and we really do need your suggestions. So especially if these are benchmarks that you use regularly and they positively impact your work, we want to make sure that we're sharing those with our colleagues. So what's next for our task force? And at this time, I feel like I should ask the task force members to mute our session here and don't look at the screen because we have quite a few more things to do. We've been working very, very hard and things have been going quite smoothly, but we do have some other things that need to be done before we complete the full revision. So first, we'll review feedback that we received from you by May 23rd. And we're really specifically going to be focusing on those appendices at that time. Then we're going to seek feedback on the next iteration of the document. And we'll make that available to our colleagues for feedback as well. And then we'll submit the final version to the ACRL Standards Committee for approval. And I can't say this enough, we want to hear from you. So please fill out the brief feedback form by Tuesday, May 23rd. And there's a link posted here. We also have the link posted in the ACRL Insider blog post about this session and about the revision of the SLHE. So please do fill that out. It is very brief, and you can skip sections if there are things that you really don't have any comment on. And we'll be looking at those in the next few weeks. And so I'm going to take a quick glance at our time. We have about 10 minutes left. And so if there are any other questions, we'd be happy to try and address those at this time.
It looks like Vicki has a question in the chat. Will the benchmarks be tied to the ACRL statistics?
That's a really good question, Vicki. I'm not sure to what extent they currently are or are not tied to ACRL statistics, so that might be something for our team to look into a little bit further, but that's a really good question.
And again, there's another question from Vicky. How are we to find benchmark data of our peers?
Yeah, great. Okay, Vicki. So benchmarking data for your peers can be found, and this is going to depend really who your peers are, but through IPEDS data and also the ACRL statistics, that counting opinions software, and Kara can probably put some information about that. Don't mean to put you on the spot, Kara, but could put some information about that in the chat box here, perhaps for us. But going to IPEDS again too, it depends who your peers really are, but IPEDS should have some of that data for you. Might not have really in-depth library-specific data, but some of that can be useful. Yeah, so that's what I use now, right? Thanks, Kara. Yes, the ACRL survey, right? ACRL metrics is the name of that system. So I don't know if you are using that currently, Vicki, but that might be something to explore. Yep. Okay. Great. So I think that means you are using it or you will explore it. Either way, I think that's great. So there's a good question here from Sharon. And Sharon says, is there a new introduction or a draft introduction to the standards? And we have been working on a draft introduction, although it is incomplete at this time because it does include things like the approval date for the new standards and things like that. So there, to my recollection, there are not major changes within that introduction, but we have some information that isn't yet available to us to be included in that. But we will be posting that, I imagine, with the next iteration, and we may have to leave a few of those details blank, again, to sort of like the approval date of the new standards and things like that. But good question, thank you.
And Kara has posted a link to the ACRL Insider archive.
Great. So it looks like maybe that's some information about IPEDS and ACRL metrics, I think, making some changes. So go ahead, that might be useful, especially Vicki, for some of those questions you're asking. So other questions or general feedback about some of the content we've talked about today, that's also welcome. Just to get a good sense of how you're feeling about these proposed revisions. So not seeing too much activity in the chat box, so we'll move forward with our thank you. Here is the contact information specifically for myself and for Felice, but I encourage you to talk with any of us on the task force. Again, we have our membership listed on the ACRL website, and it's also included within these slides. A quick reminder that the recording and the slides will be available perhaps by early next week, and we'll be posting those in ALA Connect as well. So anyone who did not register for this can view the information as well. So I want to thank you for your time, attention, and thoughtful participation over the last hour. We look forward to reviewing your feedback through the online form. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you all.